Hi there! In the first segment of this online unit, I talked about the principles of situational mapping and analysis as set out by Adolph Clark as a reworking of the tradition of grounded theory and symbolic interaction theory. In the second segment, I want to basically talk about practical methodological aspects of my own current work in order to try to spell out why I find the principles of situational mapping and analysis so important and useful for urban studies. And I want to be clear from the start, of course, that I'm not talking about my own work because I consider it in any way exemplary in quality terms. The point is simply that because it is my own work and I know it from the inside, so to speak, I can talk you through more of the grounded considerations and difficulties that I face along the way, in the hope that this might be useful for you in thinking about and conducting your mini fieldwork. My recent work looks at climate mitigation and adaptation politics in what I call world port cities in Europe and East Asia. Cities which, if we believe the predictions, face serious challenges of sea level rise, intensified storm surges, flood risks, and so on. Specifically, I've done relatively short-term fieldwork of approximately 1.5 months in each city in 4 such cities: Yokohama in Japan, Hong Kong, Rotterdam in Holland, and here in Copenhagen. In each city, I focus on the way climate issues are mediated through and become the subject of contention in planning and activist practices to do with specific large-scale urban waterfront redevelopment projects. I'm particularly interested then in the encounters, boundary zones, and negotiations in between planning and activism. Moreover, because climate is a rather amorphous set of urban issues, this means that I also take an interest in how actors differently relate climate issues to a broader politics of sustainability in the city. The first point to make about this is to say that my research situation fits Clark's description quite well. To take urban controversies over climate and sustainability as a research topic is to place oneself within a highly complicated social arena with relations fanning out in all directions. And while, to be honest, I'm no fan of postmodernist rhetoric, I can confirm with Clark that my research setting is indeed full of, as she says, partialities, positionalities, complications, instabilities, irregularities, contradictions, heterogeneities, situatedness, and fragmentation. The point being, as I see it, that rather than think of this complexity as an insurmountable problem, as if somehow amorphous issues like climate change in the city simply could not be researched, what I and we need to do very often are practical tools to handle and inquire further into the entangled relationalities at work in such urban situations. And situational mapping and analysis, in my view, provide just such useful practical tools. Here, I want to talk in more depth about my work in Hong Kong as an example of my methodology, mainly because I recently finished writing and reflecting on this. And I should start by saying that rather than deploying Clark's 3 strategies of situational maps, social worlds arena maps, and positional maps in a stringent fashion, what I've done is to use a general cartographic approach to inform my methodological choices at important junctures in the research process. As such, situational mapping has helped me locate and gain an analytical handle on what I consider particularly important relations in the social arena of Hong Kong climate-related planning and its politics. And over time, it has helped me to organize my observation into emergent codes and categories in dialogue also with existing research. And arguably, this mapping approach has been particularly important to me since, as an outsider, I of course did not possess embodied first-hand knowledge of the relevant Hong Kong settings when I arrived. My first use of Clark's mapping tools was in the very early phases of research, where I was trying to get a basic sense of activity on the ground. Who are involved with climate-related planning and activism in Hong Kong? Which organizations are active? How do they relate? What positions do they take? Entering this arena started long before my actual fieldwork, using various digital means and resources. Visiting websites, reading NGO reports, following connections suggested by hyperlinks on websites, and so on. This was also the stage at which I decided not to focus on the general policy level. As you can imagine, like other cities, Hong Kong nowadays has a climate change strategy, but its actual implementation is highly uncertain. And to focus instead on the high-profile Kai Tak waterfront redevelopment project. Because in my initial mapping, this project seemed to crystallize a lot of the tension and controversies over climate and sustainability issues in Hong Kong, and hence suggested itself as a suitable case study. Sorry about the slight confusion in the slides here. This choice of focusing on Kai Tak also meant a certain refocusing of my mapping strategies, because it allowed me to hone in on a set of more specific encounters and controversies in between planning and activism. And in a version of Clark's Social Worlds arena mapping, I started making lists of all the civic groups, NGOs, citizen coalitions, and so on that had at some point been active in contesting some sustainability dimension of the Kai Tak planning process, and to engage in some open coding of these activist engagements in terms of their main concerns, their settings, their tools, and so on. This yielded a rather extensive, but still bounded set of diverse collective actors, from highly professionalized NGOs active in official hearing processes to ad hoc grassroots groups engaged in community mobilization. Likewise, it yielded a wide set of activist concerns with sustainability, from air pollution to building density, river and water rehabilitation, bicycle routes, energy consumption, heat island effects, and so on. And finally, it brought into view a very fragmented planning scene with multiple government agencies variously the target of activist attention. Equipped with this initial social arena and positional map, assembled, as I said, from documentary resources, I arrived in Hong Kong with a good sense of the actors, settings, and relations on whom to focus for my more on-the-ground interviewing and ethnographic observations. And importantly, I knew that this work needed to be multi-sided. Rather than place myself only in one setting, say in a specific community, I would need to move about between government, professional, and activist offices and venues based on the principle of following the issues or the public controversies at stake around Kai Tak. I was able to gain a workspace within one of the more professional activist offices, whose archive on the planning process turned out immensely helpful for me to reconstruct what I started to categorize as different issue trajectories. For instance, what was the trajectory of planning, activist engagement, and struggle around the so-called Kai Tak Nulla, basically a drainage canal which, since the mid-2000s, had been subject to various activist and community mobilizations to rehabilitate it into an ecologically and socially more livable river? Who were the main activists? Who were the main publics? Who were the main government officers, and so on, active on this specific set of issues? Who would I need to interview to gain more insight and to learn more about the process? Just as Clark suggests, my mapping exercises and the various open codes and categories that emerged from it, such as these issue trajectories, became important tools in guiding me more deeply into specific layers of the urban situation, suggesting avenues for further data production. And as I gradually gained grounding in these specific urban realities, my ability to navigate its various power asymmetries also increased, in the sense that my ability to ask progressively more informed and pointed questions allowed me to snowball for new informants also within the hallmarks of Hong Kong planning power. A lot of my work then came to rely on forms of expert interviewing, a specific and challenging genre of qualitative interviewing where one needs to be acutely sensitive to positionalities of power and knowledge, and to be able to play such positionalities vis-a-vis each other in order to pry open initial layers of organizational protectionism, not least in a setting like Hong Kong, which at best could be called semi-democratic and thus not always very transparent. In the end, I like to think, and I hope that my written reports will document, that this kind of multi-sided approach, informed by Clarke's situational mapping, has allowed me to render inchoate aspects of the urban planning and sustainability arena of Hong Kong more visible than usual, and hence to showcase, as Clarke says, power in its more fluid and contested forms. And as such, there is of course not simply an analytical, but also a normative dimension to this work of mine. Like Clarke and others, I think of situational mapping as allowing for forms of critical qualitative research. Yet, this critical positioning is itself of a specific sort. It is a positioning oriented to opening up power-inflicted urban settings for scrutiny, and thus to slow down reasoning, as philosopher Isabelle Stengers would say, on the kinds of public issues at stake. As such, I think of it also as a tool for gauging the extent to which the many technical, expert-dominated issues of urban planning are, or perhaps could be, rendered subject to closer public scrutiny through what we might call technical democracy. Discussing this, however, will have to await for the summer school itself, and I look forward to this. For now, I hope you have gained a better sense of what situational mapping and analysis might do for you as well in trying to pry open the situations of urban life, activism and politics that concerns you. So once again, good luck on your mini fieldwork.